Welcome to the Ocala National Forest. I am your host, Joseph Olphert. And today we're going to do a little infomercial for you. The Ocala National Forest is some 383,000 acres of land, pristine, mostly forest. A lot of pine scrub forest, a lot of pine trees, and a lot of sinkholes. Ocala National Forest is actually founded on limestone rock from the Florida aquifer. And that's because aquifer is like a spongy, like rock. When it gets waterlogged to some places, it tends to weaken and it creates a lot of natural sinkholes. And this is an example of one of the sinkholes. This is a shot of just the undergrowth. This is a normal forest at eye level. You notice a lot of the trees are less than 3 meters tall, less than 10 feet tall. This is all undergrowth. All the trees you see are between 20 and 30 years old, except the ones in the far ground that are about 50 to 60 years old. But this is all a lot of undergrowth. Fires come through here often, and actually the fire is a natural part of the pine tree's life cycle. The seeds don't open up until the fire burned out and killed all the undergrowth, and this is the undergrowth that goes before the fire. After, you'll see a bunch of pine trees. This is the top view of the water at the bottom of the sinkhole. You see the color is green. That's because it's filled with algae and little baby lily pads. It's about 2 inches thick, and the water itself is kind of black because all the muck and mud. This is, even though it looks kind of unusual and non-hospitable to humans, to the animal life and the wildlife, this is a refuge. This is both a water source and a place to give off young and exchange a bunch of carbon. If you try to step in the water, you'll see methane and carbon start coming up and bubbling out of the soil. The soil itself has plenty of nematodes and worms dwelling inside of it. And as well, because this is Florida, you might actually see an alligator down in there. I would be careful because alligators in this area might get to 10 to 5 feet long. It's still big enough to bite your arm off. Other alligators around Florida you'll see in Silver Springs area can get as big as 10 to 15 feet long, and the record so far has been 18 feet for an American alligator. They're not as ferocious as crocodiles, but I'd still say they're so close. Maybe got around their eyes, I would still watch out for them. This is an example of an aquifer. This is actually a spring. Spring is where the limestone has a hole so big you can fit water through it. Not just any water, but water that is always 72 degrees year-round, that is always kept underneath the ground. Also some of the most freshest water in town because it's naturally cleaned by the plants that live inside this aquifer. But you contrast this spring water versus the border right here, and you start to see these green water right here, and this border's right here, where the water makes the algae and becomes swamp. It's because this area happens to be shallow. But you also see things inside the spring that dwell inside that. You'll see weeds, you'll see fish, you'll see algae that live on the bottom on the ground. You'll even see elephant ears. And you'll see crawfish, brim, pumpkin seed, bass. You'll see sunfish and minnows live in this area. This seems about the unusual water flow patterns. This area here, this embankment, at the top you see a forest or the undergrowth growing in vines, and right here you see the ground just drop right off. This is the residue from the ground dropped off about 3 years ago, and it rained afterwards. So this is a rain, ground drops off, and then it rains again. And these are root systems where water once flowed. You see the water just tore the dirt right off. You see where a lot of places where you'll see underneath ground, and underneath you'll see broken ground, and then you'll see rock or mud or earth underneath it. You see up here where the rocks have fallen or cracked off from other rocks. This is fresh limestone. You see the white. It hasn't even been eaten alive by the moss yet. And here's an older story. This is actually where water falls off. You see the moss gets thicker and thicker. You see when it gets black. Black indicates a current water trail where water is thickest most. But this is where water flows in from, and it goes to the bottom where you seen earlier, where it flows out and breaks the earth. And this is like a waterfall sinkhole phenomenon going on, common in this Ocala National Forest area. This is a female cardinal, native to all of North America, and you'll see her going around the forest. I'm trying not to get the cusp, but she's about 20 feet away, eating on the seeds and berries that are dropped on the forest floor. This is a mound of bamboo. This is grown into the side of a rock face over here. It's about 100 feet tall, 200 feet wide, and each stalk is about 6 feet tall, about a year old. Bamboo are an invasive species. They are not native to here, and they have no natural predators or prey. But they do take up ground that could have been used by other plants, like sable palms or palm trees or pine scrubs, and they take up the ground, and they're not eaten, so they just keep flourishing. These are your sand palm trees. They're not your festive Miami version, and they're not ornate, but they exist wherever poor soil conditions are. You see in the background is a young sapling about 5 years old, and in front of you see one that's about 15 years old. They grow out bark that comes out in branches, and the branches break off. After about 10 years, the branch stump comes off too, and you see just a bare trunk. Actually, traditional Indians like the Seminole and the Appaloosa would actually cut these things in half and actually eat the hearts out as a meal. It kind of tastes kind of woody, like wood pulp, a little bit of sugar, but I wouldn't eat it every day. This is a mound of that red berry. Now, traditional folklore says the Seminole Indians used to lay around this area, and they used to use this concoction of 11 toxic different ingredients that they would use to drink when they went out hunting. This drink would allow them not to pee or crap or sleep for 3 or 4 days at a time, making them an ultimate soldier. Unfortunately, the drink is highly toxic as it contains 10, 12 different ingredients, and they're all toxic to humans. Probably the reason why they stopped urinating so much is because their urinary tracts might not have worked so well. This is some Spanish moss, named after the Spanish explorers and conquistadors that came in the area. This moss is actually inherent and indigenous to this area, very populated, and contains an insect known as the red ticks, or red bugs, and they apparently jump out and itch you. Not very nice to wear. It looks like an old man's beard, but I wouldn't go around putting it on my body, and I believe this is number 2 of the 10 ingredients in that unusual concoction. This is a tree that has been overgrown with so much Spanish moss. You can almost not even see the tree, it's just the moss you see. Spanish moss is one of the number one biggest killers to big trees, but it's not the moss that actually kills them. It's what happens when it rains and the moss collects the water and become big, huge, heavy weights. And eventually it's the weight, the gravitational pull of the water that actually brings the entire tree down. And that's also how the trees fall over, and it brings back the life cycle of a growing healthy tree to a dying tree where insects can thrive and flourish, and it becomes the ground and becomes mulch after about 20 years, and then finally it grows back, or the babies grow back as saplings. And so this is the dying of a tree, but it is part of the life cycle of the forest. Also, as well as fire is for pine forest, Spanish moss is for oaks. This is an example of a tree coming back to the circle of the ecosystem. At the very top you see the boring holes. These are made from woodpeckers and from squirrels and raccoons and other animals that have carved into it to get to the insects that are inside of it. At the base of the tree you'll see a bunch of fungus. Fungus are neither animal nor plant. They are their own column of organism. These organisms of fungus eat either animals or plants. In this case it's a plant. They are absorbing and taking in nutrients from the tree trunk and using it to promote their own growth. And you see on the tree next to it, there's also a lichen, which is a different series of creature. Lichen are more plant-like, but they are still eating off the bark and more arboreal, meaning they don't use the ground. They use air and carbon right out of the air to feed themselves. This is dedication to all the resource guides and people of knowledge who have dedicated their lives to learning more and teaching others about the Cal National Forest